You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VGMbassy. Hello and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the VGMbassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture, or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show. And speaking of solo shows, this is the much promised and much put off Volume 2 of my personal favorite composers. I've got a list of 12 more incredible individuals who have written fantastic video game scores that I have appreciated. And Volume 1 was released to pretty high praise from you guys, so I was really happy to see that a bunch of you were turned on to new composers that you weren't necessarily familiar with. Composers that you also agreed were some of your favorites. A few here and there who were like, I can't believe you like this guy, but hey, different strokes for different folks. I guess maybe from Volume 1 you've got a pretty good idea of what my tastes are. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back a couple and find Volume 1 and listen to that first. I don't know that it's going to necessarily be a prerequisite to listen to that one for Volume 2, but it might give you a good sense of where I'm coming from in this one. So, again, as I originally compiled my list, I compiled it all at once for Volume 1 and Volume 2, cut it in half, and decided to make 2 episodes out of it, so 12 and 12. So, we've already left off with the letter K on Volume 1 with Yuzo Koshiro. We're going to continue on. We're going to go a little bit down the alphabet from K-O to K-Y. And that's not what you're thinking. Get your mind out of the gutter. We're going to talk about Mr. Jesper Kyd and his amazing Genesis compositions. As a big fan of experimental electronic and industrial music, his Genesis stuff from the early 90s hits the nail on the head for music that I love to listen to. So, before we talk any more about that, let's get into some music. Here's Funky Rider from Subterranea, released on the Genesis in 1993, composed by Jesper Kyd. And that was Funky Rider from Subterranea, released on the Genesis in 1993, composed by Jesper Kyd. Jesper Kyd, back in the early days, at least when he was composing on the Genesis, tended to write music that you could do stuff to. You didn't necessarily need to be sitting up and listening to every single note, because he wrote in a style that is very repetitive, very low-key. There isn't a lot of melody going on, and there isn't a lot of high-range notes. Everything is low and mid, and it's just kind of like cool background music, and I love to just veg out to it. I could be studying or researching something, doing work, playing a different video game entirely, and still kind of get the full effect of his music. And that's hard to do with other music. For me, I generally don't like to listen to music while I'm doing other things, besides like driving. So his music is really cool because it doesn't require my entire attention to be able to appreciate fully. That said, it's also in a genre that I really appreciate, and it's so unique for the Genesis. You know, everybody else on the Genesis is kind of making these big kind of FM sweeps and very melody-driven stuff, a lot of slappy bass, people really struggling with how to use percussion, whether they do, you know, little noise channel clicks, or whether you get the sample channel involved and do a big crackly kind of snare. And I don't know, Jesper Kyd just seemed to know what he was doing. Everything just sounds like it was supposed to sound the way that it is, and not that it's supposed to be emulating something else entirely. You know, he went for a genre that is already synthesized, and he just took the instruments that were available to him and that he could create and built the song around those, instead of trying to adapt a song in his head to instruments that were available. He's had a long and storied career too. You know, his first game composition was way back in 1990, and he's still composing music up to this recording in 2019. He started off as practically a kid in Denmark doing Amiga tracker music for the demo scene. Then, when his buddies who were creating demos for the Amiga decided to create their own video game company and start making some games, he tagged along. He's like, hey, you know, I was making music for these demos. Why don't I make music for your video games too? And of course they agreed, so that's what we got. And that's why I think his music is so unique, because he wasn't approaching video game music from a perspective of a video game music composer. He was just like, hey, I'm making demo scene music and you're just going to throw it in your game. Kind of like how Tim Vollen started out. You know, that's how you get these unique sounds, as people that are just creating music because they want to, and not necessarily because they want to add it to a video game. He wrote a whole bunch of Genesis soundtracks, and then moved on to the Saturn and PlayStation, etc. And he kept getting bigger and bigger. You know, people were noticing him and his ability to create music that was kind of dark and clanky and groany like this. But then he was also starting to incorporate elements of more popular video game music, so orchestral elements, cinematic elements, more lighter synth elements. And so he was tapped to do MDK2, and then he moved on to some of the Hitman games, Minority Report. I played a track from Freedom Fighters on Pixelated Audio when we all met in Washington, D.C., Kane and Lynch, Unreal Tournament, Assassin's Creed. Most recently, he's been working on the Borderlands series. He composed some of the music for the upcoming Borderlands 3 video game. And he's done films, too. Films and short films. So he has honed his craft to be very versatile. And while I'm not a fan of every single one of his soundtracks, there are a lot out there that still incorporate a lot of the industrial techno styles that he had back in the 90s with more orchestral and cinematic elements that's popular today. And so I appreciate those very much. I like that he's still keeping his classic influences in with his modern AAA video game soundtracks. So he's got a wealth of games out there, and whether you're into, like I said, modern orchestral video game soundtracks, or whether you're into just down, dancey techno goodness on an FM synth chip, Just for Kids gonna have some tracks that you'll enjoy, regardless of which side of the spectrum you're on musically. Let's move on to our next track, and this one's a little unique. I'm gonna call this a video game music composer, even though it's Frontline Assembly, who's also one of my favorite industrial bands, simply because Bill Leeb, who is the founder and most consistent member of Frontline Assembly, has written music for 3 different video games, so I would think that would qualify you as a video game music composer. So we're going to listen to a track called Mechanism, and this is from Air Mech Wastelands. This came out on PC in 2017, composed by Frontline Assembly, Bill Leeb, Jared Slingerland, Sasha Keevil, Craig Johnson, and Jeremy Engel. Oh man, I love that stuff. That was Mechanism from the game Air Mech Wastelands, which came out on PC in 2017. Composed by Bill Lieb, Jared Slingerland, Sasha Keevil, Greg Johnson, and Jeremy Engel, at the time known as Frontline Assembly. And to give you a hint of how much turnover Frontline Assembly has, this game was released in 2017, it's 2 years later, and none of those band members, save for the founding member Bill Lieb, are still in Frontline Assembly. People come in, people go out, Bill stays the same. So that's why I put it under L for Lieb. So yeah, I adore this soundtrack, and the soundtrack that they did for the game that came before this, just called Air Mech. Frontline Assembly released this soundtrack as their own album called War Mech, which you can get on Frontline Assembly's Bandcamp if you do want to hear more of it. I picked this particular track because, while I do love them all, this one is a little more representative of the many sounds of Frontline Assembly over the years. They have gone from kind of light and melodic to heavier and more industrial. They've gone to dance. The only thing this song doesn't really have in it that a lot of their earlier stuff did was really heavy guitars. They released an album called Millennium back in the early 90s, which was Bill Lieb and his longtime collaborator Reese Fulber, who's no longer in the band, of course, but they collaborated with Devin Townsend, who's one of the heaviest guitarists out there, and created this just amazing industrial guitar-driven CD. And so albums after that were much lighter, and then they got heavier again. Crazy stuff. Frontline Assembly rose from the ashes of Skinny Puppy, which is, they are considered like the grandfathers of modern industrial music. And yeah, Air Mech Wastelands is kind of an isometric action game. You can play the first game, I think, in a browser, and I think the second game is only available on Steam. But they have some RPG elements to them, a little bit of strategy, a little bit of action. You're obviously playing as mechs that can fly and glide through the air, but also kind of march around and shoot at each other. I haven't played it too much, but they are really good games from what I understand, and of course the soundtracks are awesome too. Before that, Frontline Assembly did a bonus soundtrack for Quake 3 Arena, which was sold through id Software's website, and so you can get an add-on soundtrack pack with that. One of my other favorite composers, who I talked about in Volume 1, Sasha Dikisian, also wrote the original soundtrack for Quake 3. So as you can imagine, I was completely in love with both versions of the Quake 3 soundtrack. They were just noisy, industrial, grindy awesomeness. If you really like what you heard, if you want to hear some more Frontline Assembly, do not be afraid to come and ask me, and I will give you lots and lots of suggestions. If you join the VGMbassy Discord, I do have a channel in that Discord specifically set up for industrial music, where we can share our favorite bands and videos and post YouTube clips of industrial music that we enjoy and share with each other. So I would be more than happy to post up a few amazing Frontline Assembly tracks that I think you guys would enjoy. So, saying that, let's move on to our next song, and this one is called Neo Kyoto from Fast RMX. This one came out on the Switch in 2017, and the soundtrack was composed by Manfred Linsner, Bulin, and Martin Schioler. We're going to be featuring Manfred Linsner on this one. That was Neo Kyoto from Fast RMX, the 2017 Switch release, composed by Manfred Linsner, Bulin, and Martin Schioler. Those who have listened to Pixel Tunes Radio are no stranger to Manfred Linsner's music. Both Mike and I were huge fans of his. Even if you listen to my other podcast, Impulse Project, the demo scene-based podcast, we've played several tracks from him, as well as he was a big player in the demo scene, going by the handle Pink way back in the day. And he started off writing amazing chiptunes for the Amiga and the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. He did some really incredible music for Shinen, like Iridion 3D, Nanostray, and Nanostray 2. He not only wrote the music, but did a lot of programming and code. He's kind of a jack of all trades, and he creates this amazing dance music and then blends it so well with the games that he's also programming. So he does have teams that work with him, but he has a major hand in most of the releases that he's written music for. In inclusion to writing some of the 50 pieces of music that belong in this game, he was also co-executive producer, sole game designer, the sole programmer, and he co-programmed the game's engine. And he also did all the sound effects. So, on top of that, it's just this gorgeous 60 frame per second futuristic racer, and the download was under 1 gigabyte. So it took a lot of dedication and talent to get this game optimized so well. Like, this is Manfred Linsner's baby. And if you're not familiar with Fast RMX, maybe you're familiar with the game Fast, which was a WiiWare release back on the Wii, and it basically takes the premise of Wipeout and crosses it with something like Ikaruga. So you can change your hover car jet thing's affinity from blue to orange, and you are running over patches of blue and orange on these hyper twisty, turny, very fast racetracks. And if you're the wrong color when you run over the wrong patch of track, you slow down and take a little bit of damage. But if you're the right color, then you get a little speed boost. So you're not only racing against other cars, but you're also switching back and forth rapidly, and sometimes you're going through these really super fast bends and turns, and the track's going orange, blue, orange, blue, orange, blue, and you've got to switch your color affinity back and forth to make sure that you're getting those speed boosts. It's a really cool game. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's 60 frames per second. It's just this blazing fast, amazing game. I didn't know until I started doing research on Linsner that he was the sole programmer on this game, which blows my mind. Like, I knew he did some programming and I knew he was a fantastic composer, but I didn't know he was designing entire modern 3D, almost AAA quality style games by himself. So it's pretty awesome. So hats off to Manfred Linsner and his amazing music, from chiptune to modern scores. He definitely deserves it. Let's step back into the chiptune arena a little bit. We'll talk about another one of my favorite game composers that also was very big in the demo scene. We're going to listen to Subsong 1 from Sub Hunter, and this was a relatively modern Commodore 64 game. It came out in 2008, composed by Thomas Mogensen, otherwise known as Drax, of the group Maniacs of Noise. such a sleeper hit, right? That was Sub-Song 1 from Sub Hunter, released on the Commodore 64 in 2008, composed by Thomas Mogensen, otherwise known as Drax. Holy cow. So, I don't know, the song starts off pretty nicely, and it's nothing special. It's got a great groove to it. It's certainly a song composed by somebody who knew the ins and outs of the SID chip and how to get a pleasant tone out of it. Once that B section comes in, the bass rises up, and Mogensen's solos are always what get me. They sound so wistful and so yearning, and they're always kind of like soaring and not resolving, and they're just really emotional stuff. I really like that about him. And this track kind of exemplifies that. I was introduced to his music on a really cool kind of demo scene game called Break Quest, which was a PC-only release. I think it was free, and then was later made into a PSP mini title, I believe. But the soundtrack featured composers from the demo group Maniacs of Noise, the most famous of which would be Hiro Intel, the de facto quote-unquote leader of the group. Drax was, I guess, kind of like his second-hand man. He was the other longest-running composer in the group, and most of the music featured in Break Quest was Drax's. So, in playing this game, I was introduced to all of this amazing music. I really had no idea who the composer was until I finally looked through all of the game's files, just trying to find a music file, trying to find some credits or something to figure out who wrote it, and I did come across a bunch of mod files, and I was so young. I think this was like the days of like Windows XP. I was still living at my parents' house, so I was probably in my early 20s. Had to find out what a mod file was and had to figure out how to play it, and then once I figured out how to play it, I was able to see the credits and the liner notes that were still left in those files from the demo scene days, and that's when I learned the name Drax. And so upon looking that up, I discovered more about him and more of what he'd done. A couple of Commodore 64 games starting as far back as 1990, a couple of Game Boy Color games along the way. Sub Hunter was the last game that he wrote music for. He's now just doing it very, very part-time in the demo scene, but he's still creating really, really amazing music. And he's got a good dozen games under his belt. None of them were extremely popular or extremely well-reviewed, but all of the reviews always point out the music as being the high points. And I'll be playing more Drax stuff, both on Impulse Project and on the VGMbassy in the future. He's just an amazing composer, whether he's doing it for video games or whether he's just doing it for his own scene releases. He's got a fantastic ability to write in very unique sounds and taking very unique sets of instruments, especially when we're talking about Amiga mod files, which are all sample-based, taking really crazy sounds and turning them into absolutely beautiful music. As far as demo scene goes, and I've listened to tons and tons of demo scene composers and demo scene music throughout the last couple years doing Impulse Project, Drax remains my hands-down favorite of all time. Speaking of unique and emotional, next up is a composer that is emotional in a sense that you get emotional when you do a mountain of amphetamines. Yeah, we'll go with that. We're going to listen to a track called Feel the Power in Your Soul from War of the Brains. And this came out on iOS and Android in 2017, composed by Hideki Naganuma. Buckle in.
Feel the power. Just feel the music. Feel the power in your soul. You gotta feel the power. Just feel the music. Can you feel it? In your soul. 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 Shake that fine booty. Drop. Feel the power. Just feel the music. Feel the power in your soul. You gotta feel the power. Just feel the music. Can you feel it in your soul? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it in your soul? Can you feel it? Feel it. 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 Shake that fine booty. Drop. Lifting you up from inside. Play with me now.
Check the beat, 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 check the beat.
Feel the power. Just feel the music. Feel the power in your soul. Feel the power. Just feel the music. Can you feel it in your soul? You gotta feel the power. Just feel the music. Feel the power in your soul. You can feel the power. Just feel the music. Can you feel it in your soul?
So in case you didn't hear it in the song, the name of that track was Feel the Power in Your Soul, from a game called War of Brains, released on iOS and Android in 2017, composed by Mr. Hideki Naganuma. This was a completely unknown, obscure card trading game released for mobile devices, released by Takara Tomy, who I guess Takara bought Tomy at some point down the line. But I didn't even know they were still in existence, never mind making mobile games about trading cards. But here it is. And this is the theme song. Like, I'm so glad that Naganuma has his own SoundCloud and has this track on there, because otherwise I would never have been introduced to it. It's freaking amazing. I can't listen to 90% of Hideki Naganuma's music without cracking a smile. It's just so high energy, it's so fun, it demands that you bob your head or at least tap your feet or at least do something to the rhythm, because the rhythm is completely infectious, and that is the strength of Naganuma's composition. I mean, we did a whole episode on him. Rob Nichols of Rhythm and Pixels and I are both huge fans of Naganuma-san. We neglected to play this track though, and I'm glad because I was able to share it here. So, Rob Nichols, if you are listening, this one's for you, buddy. I hope you like this one. I have a feeling that you do, because we share a lot of the same tastes when it comes to his music. His sample manipulation is great. Like, he doesn't need to stretch things out or make voices sound weird to blend in with his song. He just gets chunks of people saying things and somehow is able to integrate it into the music really, really well. I really love around like the minute and 15 mark on this track where the female chorus voices come in. That's the point where I got goosebumps in this track. And the little breakdowns with the shake that fine booty drop. Like, he just knows how to do it. He uses it as percussion, he uses it as an instrument. He's just a master at using the human voice as dance instruments. So cool. And it adds so much character to his track. You know, if you were to listen to just the music in this song and take all the voices out, it obviously wouldn't have the same character. It would still be fun, it would still be infectious, but it just wouldn't have that quote-unquote Naganuma sound. Alright, let's rip off in an entirely different direction. We've been going very, very dance-heavy, very electronic. Let's do a little bit of rock and roll. This one's got a lot of nostalgic value for me and my brother growing up with our Sega CD playing this game. This is CD track 10 because they don't have any names and they don't play in any specific places in the game, from The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin. This was a Sega CD release from 1993, composed by Sega's own Spencer Nilsson. God, that song brings back so many memories. That was CD track 10 from The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, released on the Sega CD in 1993, composed by Mr. Spencer Nilsson. Though it might not be my absolute favorite track on the Spider-Man vs. Kingpin soundtrack, I feel like this song really embodies a lot of the different sounds that Nilsson wrote in across a lot of his Sega CD games. You've got the twinkly synths from Echo the Dolphin, you've got some driving beats and a little bit like harder rhythm synths that you found in like Sonic CD, and then just the hard rock and guitar stuff from the Amazing Spider-Man game. 3 games which I grew up with. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but owning a Sega CD and having a lot of these games, like Spencer Nilsson really, for a lot of kids, I think, defined what streaming audio in a video game should sound like. You know, he had this particular sound, and he wrote music for some of the top-selling games for Sega CD, so for kids that owned these games, maybe didn't even realize that he was the composer behind all of them, but they all had his kind of signature, hard-to-pin-down sound. And I know me growing up, when I thought of CD audio in games, I would think of his music in particular. I think him and Martin Iveson, who worked for Core, I had Jaguar XJ220 and AH3 Thunderstrike in my collection. Both soundtracks were written by him, and both were amazing in their own right. But that was CD video game music to me, so anything that was a little bit different than that just sounded kind of weird and maybe not as good. Spencer Nilsson is an influence on so many composers going forward, and he deserves tons and tons of recognition. I'm glad that he's now teaching music at universities, because a lot of up-and-coming composers are now going to have been taken under his wing and shown what fantastic production and getting the feel right and composing music that incorporates lots of different musicians and sounds and is a product of collaboration with people of different cultures. He was all of that back in the Sega CD game era, and that is a whole bunch of concepts that need to be rolled forward into the modern day and beyond. So he was a pretty forward thinker for his time. I think that's why Sega gave him so much leeway and carte blanche when it came to writing music for video games. You know, there's the famous story about Sonic CD and how the Japanese version of Sonic CD had a particular soundtrack, and when they wanted to localize the game and bring it out in the States, they were like, nah, Spencer, why don't you write some of your own music? We already have music, but we specifically want you to write music. We want you to be the CD sound of Sonic the Hedgehog, our greatest selling asset. And that just shows how much faith they had in him. And he delivered every single time. So, cheers to you, Mr. Nilsson. Speaking of video game companies having faith in their composers, our next composer is a very good representative of that as well on the Japanese side. I had to play this one. It's one of my favorite video game compositions ever, and it needs to be heard. So, here's the Sega CD version of Daddy Mulk from the Ninja Warriors CD. This was released on the Mega CD also in 1993, kind of a coincidence. These both came out the same year on the same system, composed by Taito's very own Hisayoshi Ogura. Alright, just give me a sec to compose myself. And that was Daddy Mulk from the Ninja Warrior CD, released on the Mega CD in 1993, composed by Hisayoshi Ogura. If you're familiar with this tune, you're welcome. And if you're not familiar with this tune, you're also welcome. This is just an amazing piece of music, and I was not privy to it until relatively recently, probably 4 or 5 years ago, which is quite a long time considering how long ago it was released. I don't know how to describe it. I think Ogura knew he had something special on his hands when he was starting this composition, and kind of like Queen did with Bohemian Rhapsody, it feels like he just kept building on the theme, and he's like, I'm gonna throw in a keyboard solo here, and then I'm gonna make a guy come out with a shamisen and go crazy over here, and I'm gonna put some crazy digitized voice samples over it, and he just went nuts. And he did it all in sequenced music for the original arcade game. So the version we're listening to isn't even the original version of the song. The original song was done in FM, and it surprisingly sounded a lot like the later live composed CD version. But the cool thing about the original version is that after the keyboard solo and the shamisen solo, Ogura threw in digitized voice samples of crowds cheering, like clapping for the shamisen solo and his own keyboard solo, which I thought was really cool. Like, I'm sure it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I was like, wow, the ego on this dude to throw in fake cheers for for his own performance. I just really, really liked that, and it showed off a little bit of his sense of humor, which was really cool. I think the music was also well received because the game itself, there's not much to it. It's pretty much a walk back and forth and kill enemies on either side of you kind of game. Very similar to, I've likened it to Kung Fu on the NES. Maybe a little bit grander in scale, but not much different in terms of the action that you do as a player against the enemies in the game. So being able to listen to an incredible song like this while you're doing kind of a mediocre action game kind of thing, it was a breath of fresh air. And through composing this soundtrack, and specifically this song, it helped Hisayoshi Ogura kind of rise in the ranks at Taito. And Taito is famous for having an in-house band called Zuntata, which we talked about a lot on the episode of Pixel Tunes Radio that I did with Brian Mosley from Pixelated Audio, concerning the arcade history of Taito in both Japan and the United States. So go seek that out, or contact me if you want a link to it, and you'll hear a lot more about Hisayoshi Ogura's career and the formation of Zuntata and why they were considered so influential in the video game music scene. Suffice to say, Hisayoshi Ogura was the lead composer in Zuntata, also the band manager. He chose who was in the band, he chose their outfits, he assigned different people to different games to create their soundtracks. So he was a bigwig there. He answered a newspaper clipping that Taito put out saying they were looking for a composer. He had no experience whatsoever. It was his first job, and he just walked into their offices, gave them a demo tape, did a short interview, and the rest was history. And I'm so glad that they gave him the resources to turn the original sequenced Daddy Mulk into a live masterpiece, and also allow him to create a full-fledged band to perform this piece and other pieces that he wrote on stage in front of audiences. I would have given anything to have been there for those performances in Japan. Well, maybe one day I'll get lucky and they'll do it again in the States. Who knows? But that being said, we're moving on to an emotional track for me. And this one is, well, alright, let's just play it and we'll talk about it when we get back. This is Up the Big Old Tree from Kirby and the Rainbow Curse. Came out on the Wii U in 2015, composed by Shogo Sakai. That was Up the Big Old Tree from Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, released on the Wii U in 2015, composed by Shogo Sakai. I don't know where to start here, because the game itself I don't really have much emotional tie to. I've spoken kind of at great length about Mother 3 and how it's one of my favorite games ever. And the funny thing about Mother 3, for me anyway, is that a lot of the game I spent playing without the soundtrack. So I didn't hear a lot of the music too. I would basically bring it to work and play it at work, and then copy the save file to Dropbox and bring it home, and then play it on an emulator at home. And at home I would listen to the music, but at work I would keep the sound down. So I only heard maybe about roughly half the soundtrack. But I went back to the soundtrack after I finished the game and listened to it on its own, and God, I fell in love with it. I don't know what it was about the music composed for Mother 3, but it just grabbed me. And the soundtrack that I had, every song loops twice. That's kind of the traditional way most video game soundtracks are. And there's like 250 pieces of music. Basically, it's a 6-hour-long soundtrack when you double it up. And so that's what I had, this collection of MP3s in a folder in the order of the music that appears in the sound test in the game. So it's kind of like, quote unquote, the official full soundtrack of Mother 3. And when I was playing the game, I was working about an hour away from my house. So I would be in the car for 2 hours every single day. So I would put the soundtrack on, leave the house, listen to an hour of it, come back another hour of it. So basically over the course of 3 days, I would get through this 6-hour soundtrack. And I loved it so much that by the time I got to the end of the soundtrack, I wanted to listen to it again. So I spent maybe, 3 or 4 weeks just listening to nothing but Mother 3 over and over and over again. And finally I had to force myself to stop because I wanted to listen to other things. Shogo Sakai's music is extremely emotional. His hopeful music is a vivid picture of a plucky young hero going off on an adventure and just full of optimism and naivete and ready to take on the world, even though it's a big, scary world. And that image always makes me tear up, especially if you're familiar with what happens in Mother 3. There is a lot of innocence and naivete being ripped away from characters left and right in Mother 3. And between the cries from the North Americans asking Nintendo to localize Mother 3 because it only got a fan translation, and the fact that they never continued the series, there was no Mother 4 or Earthbound 2 or whatever you wanted to call it, in researching more of Shogo Sakai's music, I came across Kirby and the Rainbow Curse and heard this song, and it feels to me like an extension of all of the themes and emotions that he put forth in the Mother 3 soundtrack. Especially this one here just feels like a lot of the songs from the beginning of Mother 3. And I couldn't help it, man. I literally got goosebumps, and I got so emotional just hearing those first piano chords and that plucky little bump, 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 bump. I could just see, like, Lucas or Ness just kind of walking up a hill, like bat slung over his shoulder, just kind of marching along to right whatever wrong has befallen the land this time. And oh man, it got me nostalgic and emotional. It was crazy. There's a lot of other tracks on this particular soundtrack that also sound a lot like the music from Mother 3, and I am so glad that I decided to give it a real listen. And I'm almost afraid to go seek out more soundtracks from Shogo Sakai that were written after Mother 3, because I don't know if I can handle any more music like this. So no doubt Shogo Sakai belongs in this list of favorite composers of all time. He is right up there towards the top. You know, I'm not going in any particular order from most favorite to least favorite in these shows, but if I were, he would be very, very far at the beginning of the episode. So, go listen to Shogo Sakai stuff, particularly the stuff that he wrote after Mother 3, and of course the Mother 3 soundtrack. I think if you're not familiar with his works, you're missing out on a lot of really optimistic, hopeful music. You're missing out on a lot of really cool, like, synth rock. You're missing out on a lot of very cool, jazzy jams. He's got a good handle on a lot of different genres and emotions that he plays with, and he's good at bringing them out in people. So let him bring them out in you. It's therapy with Shogo Sakai. Alright, let's move on to something a little more lighthearted and fun. We're going to listen to Champion of Strong Wind from Bushido Blade 2. This was a PlayStation game, came out in 1998, composed by Ryuji Sasai. Champion of Strong Wind, or as translated from the official OST release, Champion of Gale Slaughter Mode Shinto stage music from Bushido Blade 2, PlayStation release 1998, composed by Ryuji Sasai. Oh man, the nostalgia behind this one. My brother and I would have countless hours during the evening playing Bushido Blade 2. One of the most fun multiplayer fighting games I think ever created. Just absolute joy to play. I know I talked about it a bit when Cam Worma was on with me doing our Switch Indie show, and he introduced the game One Strike, which had many qualities which were very similar to the Bushido Blade games. But as fun as One Strike is, I don't really think it holds a candle to the amount of fun you can have with Bushido Blade 2, just running around and swiping at each other and chopping limbs and it's so much fun. And the music increases that fun factor like tenfold. Sasai's soundtrack just combines modern heavy metal with traditional Japanese instruments and instrumentation, and he does it so well. It sounds so good. Forever, I had kind of lived with the music that I ripped from the files of the PlayStation disc, which were very lossy, lower quality than MP3 files that I converted to WAV and then put on a CD that I could listen to in a car. And it wasn't until probably a year or so ago that I learned that the soundtrack had actually been released as a CD album in Japan, and found a person who was willing to provide me a lossless rip of that CD, and I am indebted to them because I finally got to hear all the music that I loved from when I was a kid in full CD quality glory, and it was like listening to the album for the first time all over again. It was just fantastic stuff. Plus, I also got to learn the names of the songs, which is neat. Like Champion of Gale, which is cool. Ryuji Sasai. I think the first time I heard his music was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which was a really good soundtrack. The battle themes in that game were fantastic. Sasai is a bassist in many rock bands, including like a Queen tribute band and a couple of other bands that play original music, but he's also quite an accomplished video game music composer too, writing music for stuff like Zack the Art of Visual Stage. He did the MSX arrangement of the original Final Fantasy soundtrack, originally composed by Nobuo Uematsu, and the MSX Final Fantasy soundtrack is fantastic. If you're a fan of the NES version, check out the MSX version, and I think you'll be very pleased with it. Other games like Rance, Heart of Phantasm 3, and most recently, he had left video game music for a while. He did work with Kenji Ito on Saga 3 Shadow or Light, released by Square in 2011, and then we didn't hear from him for a while, and recently Kemco put out a throwback RPG called Dragon Sinker, which I think was released on like PlayStation Network and stuff, but it's kind of a throwback to the old Zack RPGs with some original Final Fantasy stuff thrown in, and Ryuji Sasai did a full chiptune soundtrack for that, and it's also really, really good. I was kind of throwing back and forth whether or not I wanted to choose something from Dragon Sinker or Bushido Blade 2 for the show, and I felt like Bushido Blade 2 just meant so much to me that I really wanted to include it, just because this is the style of Sasai's music that I really appreciate, and I really enjoy his more rockin' stuff. Dragon Sinker had a little bit of rock here and there, but it was more of a traditional kind of 80s chiptune style RPG soundtrack. Not much more to say about Ryuji Sasai. He's one of those guys where anything I hear from him, I don't necessarily know that it's him right off the bat, but it's always something I'm like, oh, this is really good. I should find out who wrote this. And then invariably I find out it's him, and I'm like, oh, no wonder, because I like everything he does. All right, so moving on to another Japanese composer. Kind of a different sound from this gentleman. We're going to be listening to Homicide, that sounds pleasant, from Super Danganronpa 2. This was a PSP and iOS release in 2012, composed by Masafumi Takada. Such a cool tune. That was Homicide from Super Danganronpa 2. The PSP and iOS release came out in 2012. Composed by Masafumi Takada. First learned about Takada-san when he started working with Suda51 and Grasshopper Manufacture on games like No More Heroes and No More Heroes 2 and Killer 7, and most notably for me, God Hand, simply because Masafumi Takada's music from God Hand actually was played in several places at my wedding reception. I actually had the wedding party come out to the song It's a Smile World from God Hand, and it worked beautifully. So I love this particular track because it shows off so much of what Takada can do. There's elements of electronic and some elements of acoustic instruments in there, and he does both extremely well, and sometimes he blends things together in a way that other composers won't. Like, you'll have a very techno melody and bass line, but then he'll combine that with some really organic rock drums, or he'll take like surf rock and pair it with like hardcore techno music. He does really cool stuff, and he can match his music to the feel of whatever game he's working on, and it comes out perfectly. And it's also great to listen to on its own. Like this particular soundtrack, I've never played Danganronpa 2 before in my life. I've heard Pernell on Rhythm and Pixels talk about it a couple times, but I love listening to the music. I love the bass groove in this particular song. And the horn section comes in and you're like, none of this belongs together, but why does it all sound amazing? I remember I had to drive somewhere with Eddie, my oldest son, at one point, and he's really into hip-hop. Like, he and I don't really have a lot of musical tastes or common artists. So I was trying to think of like something I had in my collection that I could play that maybe he'll enjoy. You know, maybe we could connect over it or something. And Masafumi Takada wrote the soundtrack for the Samurai Champloo game, which I believe came out on PS2. But Eddie's really into hip-hop beats, and he's got a YouTube channel where he'll post new beats that different rappers and groups have come out with, and kind of like do instrumental beats so that other people can download them and check them out and stuff. And he's got a lot of followers, so I figured he might appreciate a lot of the really cool beats that were in Samurai Champloo, so I took that soundtrack and played it in the car. And he didn't necessarily say that he liked it, but he didn't tell me to turn it off. And knowing Eddie, that probably means that he at least enjoyed it a little bit. At least that's what I'm going for. Anyway, he's a really prolific composer in his own right. I mean, he's averaged at least 3 soundtracks a year, going back as far as 1996. He partners up with Jun Fukuda a lot whenever he's doing soundtracks that have more of a rock feel. Fukuda's a really good guitarist, so they'll get together and work on some stuff. And then he also releases music on his own personal record label called Sound Prestige, which he founded in 2008, and he's a founding member of the video game development studio 2Kyo Games, which was founded in 2017 by former members of Spike Chunsoft. So he is a jack of all trades. He's a businessman, he's a composer, he's a game designer, and I think he's done some works for anime and stuff too. I'm not terribly into Japanese AAA games and stuff, so a lot of the games that he works on are games that I don't really play, but his music is so good that I can enjoy listening to them without the context of having played the actual game, and I think that's the mark of a good composer. Lately, you guys might have heard him doing some arrangements for Crypt of the Necrodancer. He did some Danganronpa arrangements for that. The Earth Defense Force series, he's composed music for that. He's done arrangements for Super Smash Brothers. And Danganronpa, he's done music for almost all of those games. So if you're a fan of that series, you've definitely heard his music before. All right, well, let's move on to our next track. Next up is a song that goes by 2 names, either World Destroyer or Kiki, depending on where you're finding this music. It's from a game called Robonauts, which came out on the PS4 and Switch in 2017, composed by Simon Viklund. Good stuff. I mean, you feel like you're just leaving the club at 2 a.m. after having a wild, wild night, drinking nothing but water and being a responsible adult so all your friends can have a good time. At least that's how I live my life. I don't know about you. But that was World Destroyer, if you're listening to the game soundtrack. Or Kiki, if you're listening to Simon Viklund's album called Radix, which he has available on his Bandcamp page, from the game called Robonauts. This was a PS4 and Switch release in 2017, composed by Simon Viklund. He's been composing since 2001, actually, with a game called Ballistics, but I didn't even know about him until 2009, and this is because I heard the news that Grin, the game developer, was working with Capcom to create Bionic Commando Rearmed, which was a modern 2D remake of my favoritist game in the whole widest worldest, Bionic Commando, and I was ecstatic. I could not believe that this, what I thought originally was a very obscure NES title that I happen to be very good at, could have ever gotten a modern remake. And so they had a website set up for it, and they were doing a lot of press for it, and it was getting a lot of hype. And they announced that Simon Viklund would be doing the music, and I was really interested in the music, of course, because I was super familiar with the original NES soundtrack. And while I like the original NES soundtrack, I never considered it to be one of my favorite pieces of music. But they started releasing snippets of the soundtrack here and there as it was being completed, as the game was being developed. And holy cow, Simon Viklund's remakes of this soundtrack just blew me away. Absolutely incredible stuff. He took the melodies from the NES version of the game and pumped it up so far, made it into this huge big beat, like Prodigy style dance anthems that not only fit the game very well, but I could listen to time and time again. It was just a mainstay in my car. And when the game came out in 2009, Eddie was like 4 years old. So this was like, he hears me play this song and his eyes kind of light up. And I can tell, even if he pretends he doesn't like it, this was the music that he grew up on. So there's probably a lot of childhood nostalgia in the Bionic Commando Rearm soundtrack for him. And then later on, as he got older, he started getting into the Payday games, which are basically like first-person bank heist multiplayer online games. And he was playing one day, and I was kind of watching him, and I'm listening to the music, and I'm like, I know this style. Like, I can... This sounds very familiar, even though I've never heard it before. So, of course, I went and looked up the composer, and lo and behold, Simon Viklund writing the music for Payday and Payday 2. So I had to go out and get those soundtracks, and I really like them. I've never played Payday before, but the music was absolutely fantastic. He did the music for Bionic Commando Rearmed 2 as well, but they were original tunes, and while they're good songs, I don't know. I keep trying to hear Bionic Commando in them, and I don't think I gave the soundtrack a good enough shake. So maybe I ought to go back to that at some point and listen to them again. He's also a sound engineer, so he's done engineering on games like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, Terminator Salvation. He did do the Final Fight Double Impact remake soundtrack as well, so he kind of did Final Fight music in the style that he did the Bionic Commando Rearmed music in, and that's really, really good. I think I played a snippet of that on a previous podcast, but if not, I'll share that at some point. Robonauts was one of his most recent games. He did another game in 2018 called GTFO, which he was a composer and a game designer for, which I don't know much about, so I'm going to have to go check that out as well. Having a guy this talented and this awesome and whose tastes align with mine so well, also remaking the music for one of my favorite video games of all time, definitely puts him on my list of favorite video game composers. This is one of the few instances where I would say that the remake soundtrack is better than the original soundtrack. You may disagree with me, but don't care. Anyways, Robonauts, cool little game. I haven't played it too much, but it's got a good amount of action in it. This is really the only piece of music that plays in the game, and it's just so catchy. It really kind of captures Viklund's style and how he can create these real dance hall anthems, but also make it something that you're gonna probably be humming or whistling to yourself later on in the day and being like, where did I hear that tune? Why is that so catchy? And you'll remember at some point that it's Mr. Viklund's tunes. Alright, so let's head into our last track of the show, saving a really interesting one for last. Of course, I couldn't do a favorite composer's show without Mr. Akira Yamaoka. And even though I love him the most for writing the music for almost all of the Silent Hill games, there's another soundtrack by him out there that I really enjoy as well, and that's Sign Mora. And that was a very interesting and absolutely gorgeous horizontal shoot 'em up, also from Grasshopper Manufacture. So we're going to play 2 tracks from Sign Mora. One we're going to listen to now, and the other one is going to take us out at the end of the show. The first one is called Last Enki City B. This game came out on Android, iOS, Ouya, PS3, Vita, PC, Xbox 360, and Switch. And again, composed by Akira Yamaoka. We'll be right back. And that was Last Enki City B from Sign Mora, released on Android, iOS, Ouya, PS3, Vita, PC, Xbox 360, and Switch in 2012, composed by Akira Yamaoka. Now, I understand Akira Yamaoka's music is not for everybody. He has this kind of energetic decay to his music where you feel like things are falling apart, but they're in a big rush to do so. It's really weird how he combines up-tempo beats with just horrifying sounds. And that's what I like about him so much. I think a lot of industrial music is kind of like that. It's just a driving force of entropy, and it's that kind of juxtaposition that really kind of piques my interest in a lot of this music. Yamaoka's really good at doing that. If you weren't a big fan of this track, wait till the outro track. We're going to listen to Tira A from Mora. It's a little more synth poppy, a little more rich in tone, but still kind of creepy and horrifying. I remember I first heard about Akira Yamaoka's music through a friend of mine. His name is Kevin Wigginton, and he's a drummer in a doom metal band Sea of Bones, which are really good, so check them out. I think they're actually on tour right now, but anyway, so we were really good friends for a while back in the day, and he was super duper into video game music, and since Sea of Bones is like drone doom metal, he was really kind of into really noisy stuff, and the original Silent Hill soundtrack is very noisy, very droney, and also kind of punctuated with some industrial style stuff too. So he and I kind of bonded over that soundtrack because it had elements that we both really appreciated in it. And when Silent Hill 2's soundtrack came out, it sounded more like the stuff that I enjoyed. It had a little bit more of a beat, it had a little bit more of an up-tempo feel to it. And then Silent Hill 3's soundtrack came out, and it was even more so, and kind of started incorporating elements of hip-hop and everything. But I'm looking back, and I'm like, wow, these are 3 really good soundtracks that I really enjoy. And I started trying to find other stuff that Yamaoka had done. And previous to Silent Hill, there isn't a lot that is, like, specifically his. Like, he wrote the Contra Shattered Soldier soundtrack and some music for like Rumble Roses, and he had some writing credits on Contra Hardcore and a couple other things here and there, but nothing that really sounded like Silent Hill. And I remember hearing the story that he basically, when he learned that Konami was making a horror series, Yamaoka basically begged his superiors to write the music for the game. Like, I think he really, really wanted to do this kind of music, which makes sense because he ended up doing it for like the next 10 to 15 years. But that kind of cemented him as absolutely one of my favorite composers of all time. It's the only game series where I have every single soundtrack on CD in my collection. I don't know, he's probably the composer that most aligns with my musical tastes as just a person in general. His music sounds like the music that I make up in my head when I'm bored. So that being said, I'm kind of glad that we're ending the show on his music because it really kind of rounds everything out. And it's also kind of a big spectrum of music that I like. You know, I think we started Volume 1 with Matt Creamer, who's extremely melodic, driving bright songs, major keys, stuff you can really dance to, and then we're ending on dreary, dingy, industrial, sludgy stuff. So I feel like that really shows off kind of the two ends of my musical tastes. So that about wraps up the show. I think, at least I hope, that I clued you in to some of the stuff that I'm really into, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, I got some really good feedback about my favorite composers Volume 1, and I don't think I'm done with this. I think there are probably some other composers that I might have left off. I've got kind of another auxiliary list being built, so maybe you'll hear a non-alphabetical order Volume 3 at some point in the future. Not right away, but we'll get there at some point. And I'm sure that I will discover new amazing composers as my journey throughout the world of VGM podcasting continues. All right, so to wrap up the show, as always, I'd like to thank Indira for the art, Trevin Hughes for the podcast theme song, and all of my lovely Patreon patrons at the tourist level, Cameron Childs and Michael Bridgewater from the Forever Sound Version podcast, our VGM series, Chris Murray, Chris Myers, Donovan Orfino, Ben the Dyad Dishman, John Jekyll, Chris Steenerson, Jordan Worma from the Table to Stage podcast, Volt Supreme, and Dan Parrish. our audio attaché members, Cameron Werma, Carlito from the Heroes 3 podcast, and Scott McElhone, and our VG ambassador, the patron saint of VGM podcasts, Alex the Messenger. Guys, don't be afraid to tell your friends about the VG Embassy, and don't be afraid if you are listening on iTunes to go leave a rating and a review. It helps the show get some more visibility, helps the show get some more downloads and some more listeners. I'd love to be able to share my VGM culture and everyone else's VGM culture with as many listeners as possible, so that's very important. Don't forget, we are also available on Spotify, on Google Play Music, anywhere where you can find quality podcasts. We are probably there. And if there's a spot where you normally listen to podcasts and we are not there, let me know, and I will try to get us there. You can always find us on Twitter at the VGMbassy, or on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/the VGMbassy, and you can head over to thevgembassy.com, and from there you can jump over to our Patreon page and check out the tiers that I have. I've got a lot of really cool perks and benefits for subscribers, including exclusive access to our Patreon Lounge Discord channel, which is a branch of our regular Discord VG Embassy channel that only subscribers have access to, where I will post previews of upcoming shows, ask questions, and let the subscribers take part and have a say in various aspects of the VG Embassy. And subscribers at the VG Emissary tier or higher get a bonus show every single month with more music and more cool conversation with my buddies Joe and Todd. So check that out if you can. As always, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with another episode of the VG Embassy. We're going to leave off on Tira A from Sign Mora, composed by Akira Yamaoka. See you next time.